Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd, fa'auzu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Bismillahir rahmanir rahim. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul 'uqdatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters, and welcome to another episode of Muslim Inside with me, Raja Ziaulhaq. Today, inshallah, we're going to do our last series of questions about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, about the proof for the existence of Allah, and some of those doubts that oftentimes atheists will raise up. And alhamdulillah, yesterday we talked about the problem of evil in quite a bit of detail, and inshallah today we're going to proceed on from there and talk about some other questions that oftentimes atheists will raise. Now, one of these questions is regarding the creation of the universe. So for example, when you tell them that the universe was created by God, so they will say, okay, who created God? And that oftentimes leaves a lot of theists, people who believe in God, in a bit of a confusion that, I have never really thought this through, that who created God? So that's a very interesting question and a very interesting way to put things, but when you realize it, it's a very illogical question. Let me explain how. Now imagine if you've ever seen falling dominoes. You know, when you stack up these domino bricks, and when you tip off one of them, it sets off a chain reaction that gets one brick down, then the other, then the other, then the other, and then finally the last brick falls. Now imagine that you're stepping outside of your house and you see a line of domino bricks going as far as the eye can see. And so very soon you begin to hear the sound of falling bricks. And the sound is getting louder and louder and louder until you now begin to see that there are bricks following towards you. And so they keep following until the last brick falls right at your feet. Now, pause this for a second and answer me this. Do you think that this process had been going on till infinity? Or do you think that there was a first brick which was pushed by someone, which started off that chain reaction? So here are the options. Option A is this process has been going on for infinity. And option B is no, it certainly began at a certain point because somebody must have tipped off the first brick, even though it was maybe 2 kilometers away or 5 kilometers away or maybe 100 miles away. Okay? But at some point, somebody did push the first brick, which in fact set off the chain reaction, and I got the last brick falling at my feet. So I think any person with any amount of common sense would say that no, the process began somewhere. Somebody must have started it. Now, and the reason for that is because we don't have infinity in our universe. Infinity does not exist as far as we're concerned. Yes, in theory it exists, but in practicality, infinity does not exist. For example, if I was to say that look at the door in your room, do it now, look at the door in your room. The door in the room in which you're sitting right now, let's say that door is about 10 feet away from you, okay? So let's assume that that door is 10 feet away from you. Okay, so if I was to say that walk half the distance between you and the door, and then walk half the distance between you and the door, and then walk half the distance between you and the door, and then just keep doing that until you reach the door. So the distance between you and the door right now is 10 feet. You walk half the distance. Half the distance is what, 5 feet. So you get up from your seat and you walk 5 feet towards the door. Okay, great, you've made progress. Now you have to repeat the formula. Now walk half the distance between you and the door. So now the distance between you and the door is 5 feet. Half of 5 feet is 2.5 feet. So you walk another 2.5 feet. So now you've traveled 7.5 feet already. Then you've got 2.5 feet left. And so now you have to walk another half of that distance. So that's 1.25 feet. So you walk 1.25 feet. And so you keep doing this. My question is, will you ever reach the door? Think about this. Will you ever reach the door? The answer from a theoretical standpoint is no. If you look at it from a theory perspective, you will never ever reach the door, because the thing is, every time you come close to the door, you have to travel half the distance between you and the door. So at one point it will become like you have to move 0.000000001 feet towards the door. And then half of that you have to walk. And then half of that you have to walk. So the thing is, you will be taking these little micro steps towards the door, but you will never ever reach the door. Is that something that happens in practicality? No, you can reach the door very easily. But the thing is, in theory, you could argue that you have infinity, and infinity does exist. But in the real world, infinity does not exist. What we experience in our world right now is that there is a cause and effect principle. When things happen, there is a certain cause. Now, why did I give you all of this science about, domino bricks falling and all of that? The reason for that is that the universe, as we know it, is already here. It's already created. It's not something that's infinite and it's trying to be created, or it could have been created, or would have, or should have been created. No, it's already here. It means that it did begin to exist at a certain point in time. You cannot claim that this has always been, because we know that in our world, always been does not exist. Yet, just like the example I gave you of the following domino bricks, would never imagine that this has been happening for infinity. We would know that it did begin at a certain point in time, because all of this is a chain reaction. So it couldn't have just popped out of nowhere. And so we understand that it did begin to exist. Now, at what point the scientists would say it happened with the Big Bang? Okay, we don't have really a problem with the Big Bang. So if they say that it happened with the Big Bang, fair enough. But the question now is that if you claim that the universe began to exist from the time of the Big Bang, whereby there was a ball of mass, limited mass, because the mass of the universe is consistent, and the volume could have been XYZ, whatever volume it was. We can't really judge that. And so it just exploded. And that's what set off the chain reaction that created the universe, that basically caused the creation of the planets and the galaxies and the stars. This is what the Big Bang Theory is in a nutshell, because in the late 1920s, Edwin Hubble, he basically observed the movement of the galaxies, that the galaxies were moving away from each other. So basically he portrayed it like if you have a deflated balloon, for example. So imagine you have a balloon and the air has been taken out of it. And you put, with a marker, you put like 5-6 dots on it. Now when you blow air into that balloon, you do that, right? So when you blow air, the dots on the balloon are going to move further away from each other or closer together? The answer would be that they would move further away from each other, right? So when you blow air into the balloon's volume increases and the dots move away from each other. So as they move away, he explained the phenomena like that the galaxies were moving upwards and outwards of one another. They were moving away from each other. So him, along with other scientists, when he began to make these observations, the scientists realized that if we were to reverse this process, like for example, right now we're observing an expanding universe. We're observing the expansion of our universe. Our universe is expanding as if it experienced some kind of explosion. And so if we were to reverse the process, all of this would come back to a single point in time where it all used to be one mass. It'll all come back to that point, which basically led to the Big Bang Theory, right? That the universe was a huge giant ball of mass which exploded, and then everything just was set in motion. The question, however, is when t was zero, when time was zero, at that point when the Big Bang occurred, who put that ball of mass there in the first place? Big question. Secondly, who lit the fuse? Because we know that things just don't explode out of nowhere. How did that ball explode? Or who actually triggered it? Who lit the fuse? So this is not the area of science now, because this is beyond t is equal to zero. Before time was zero, this is beyond that. And science has no visibility there. Science cannot see what happened before that. But based upon logical deduction, you could say that the universe A created itself. You have three options. A, the universe created itself, or it came out of nowhere, or C, the universe was created by someone. The first one is the universe created itself. That is a logical impossibility. How can the universe exist and not exist at the same time? It doesn't make sense. That the universe created itself. It's like you're saying that my mother gave birth to herself. It's not possible, physically impossible. The second thing is, the universe came out of nowhere. And we know that nothing comes out of nowhere. I mean, if I have nothing in my hand and I produce something out of it, that's not physically possible. That I create gold out of my thin hands. Like for example, from thin air, I create gold. It doesn't work like that. I need matter to make more matter. So the universe coming out of nowhere also doesn't make sense. The only logical explanation you have now is that the universe was created. It began to exist at a certain point in time. And there was a cause behind it. So now when you look at it from that perspective, it is only logical to assume that there was an original initiator of the heavens and the earth. Just because you say that, okay, fine, so who created him, that's irrelevant. The thing is, you have to come back to one singularity which basically caused this whole reaction. Because just like the following bricks, the domino bricks, if I was to say to you that, in order for the last brick to fall, the one behind it has to fall. You say, okay, so who will make that brick fall? I'll say the one behind that. And what about that one? The one behind that, and the one behind that, and the one behind that. So this will keep on going on and on and on until we say that no, one person has to be there who is outside of the realm of the bricks, who has to basically initiate the whole reaction. There has to be somebody who has to initiate the reaction. It can't go on till infinity. Let me give you another example. Imagine that there is a sniper, and he's got his sight set on a target. And he's about to pull the trigger, but then he realizes that he needs approval of his superior officer. So the sniper is, let's say, a lieutenant. And he needs permission from the captain. So he says to the captain, "Captain, sir, do I have permission to fire?" The captain says, "No, I need to check with the major." So he calls up the major. And so the major says, "I need to check with the colonel." And the colonel says, "I need to check with the brigadier." And the brigadier says, "I need to check with the general." And the general says, "I need to check with my wife." And she says, "I need to check with my son." And he said, "I need to check with my wife." And she said, "I need to check with my mom." And she said, "I need to check with my son." And you see how this process is going to go on and on and on, because each person is not taking responsibility. This will go on till infinity, because each person is just passing the buck here and there. And will the sniper now in this situation ever be able to fire that shot? The answer is no, because this is just keep going on and on and on. But what if I tell you that at some point the sniper actually did fire the shot? What if I was to tell you that at some point the sniper actually did fire the shot? That would mean that somewhere down that chain, somebody said, "I don't need to ask anyone, go ahead and pull the trigger, fire." My dear brothers and sisters, the universe is already here. The shot has been fired. The trigger has been pulled. It's already here. So we already know that there has to be an original initiator who gave that order. This discussion that who created God, then who created God, this would happen if the universe wasn't created. Then you could answer and ask this question that, no, you see, we can't create the universe because if you say God would create the universe, then who would create God? We would say, okay, God would be created by, na'udzubillah, if you were to argue like that, say A created God. Okay, then who would create A? B. Okay, B. Who would create B? B would be created by C. Okay, then who would create C? C would be created by D. And this would go on and on until you get to Z, and then you say Z would be created by Z1, and then Z2, and then Z3. So the universe would never get created like that. This could be a discussion you would have if the universe was not created, but the universe is here. The Big Bang has occurred. The shot has been fired. It means that there was an entity, there was a being who gave that final order, and that being and entity needed advice from no one. And we as Muslims say that that being is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has many angels working for him. Huge number of angels working for him. But Allah is the one who is the initiator. Badi'us samawati wal ard. Allah is the one who is the originator of the heavens and the earth. For him it is kun fayakun. He says be and it is. So the Islamic worldview is completely in line with natural phenomena, with science, with the Big Bang Theory, whatever you want to call it, our worldview is completely in line with the creation of the universe. So, alhamdulillah, when this question is asked, we have the best response to that. That God is the one who is the initiator of the heavens and the earth, who does not need permission from anyone else. Rather, for him, it is to say to some, he is to just give that order, and the rest is done. This is what we believe is the most logical, the most rational view with regards to the creation of the heavens and the earth. Because even when you ask scientists, for example, that what happened before the Big Bang, a lot of the scientists would be absolutely baffled and puzzled. Because we know in physics that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. In physics, this is the law of the conservation of energy and matter, that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. What does that mean? That you cannot create matter out of thin air, and neither can you destroy matter. Like, for example, there's a pen, you cannot destroy this pen and wipe it out from the face of the universe. What do I mean by that? Because even if you say, okay, fine, you could melt it. If you melt it, you've simply changed its state. You've changed it from solid to liquid. You could heat it further and make it vapor, but that's still matter. Either it's solid or liquid or gas. Matter cannot be created nor destroyed. It remains constant in the universe. It cannot be created. So the big fat question is, where did that ball of mass come from? You have to logically and rationally come to that conclusion that somebody, some being, some entity has put it there. Some being or some entity that was not part of the universe, that was outside of this universe. Like, for example, I have a watch, right? If I, for example, let's say for the sake of argument, I made this watch. Now imagine there are little bacteria inside the watch, and they're living their lives. They don't have a clue who I am. They're just living their lives inside this watch. And they're arguing about the creation of the watch, that who created the watch. Now, they can argue all they like, but I am not a part of this watch. I am outside of this watch. I'm not inside. For them, it might be hard to understand the workings of the watch, what's going on, how everything is interconnected. But me being the watchmaker, know what's going inside. And I'm not directly a part of this watch. I'm outside of it. So the thing is that whoever created the universe was not bound by the laws of physics that you and I are bound with. Was not bound by matter cannot be created nor destroyed. Whoever created, because as a matter of fact, you could argue that the one who created the universe did in fact create those laws as well. That gravity has to apply, that every action has an equal and opposite reaction, that a body would stay at a state of rest or uniform motion unless an external force is applied to it, that matter cannot be created nor destroyed. All of these laws, that being, that entity created for the first time to set things in motion. Just like I'm not bound by the laws inside this watch, the workings inside this watch. I'm not bound by those laws. I am the watchmaker outside of this watch. Similarly, the creator of the heavens and the earth is not bound by the laws of physics that you and I are bound with. He's outside of that. And he, in fact, is the one who created these laws for you and I, for this universe to function as it does. There was a famous research paper from Leeds University which compared the creation of the universe to a watch, and saying that it is far, far, far more complicated than any watch, the creation of the universe. As a matter of fact, one of the molecular biologists, I was watching a documentary, he said that forget about the universe, just looking at the human DNA, the human DNA, we thought maybe about 100 years ago that it was as complicated as a car, that the human DNA was as complicated as a motor vehicle. But he says now, the understanding we have now of the DNA is that it is as complicated as a galaxy. It is as complicated as a galaxy. It's completely, it's huge, the amount of information in there. So the thing is that when we say that the universe was built upon principles of mathematics, according to Leeds University, the universe was built upon, designed upon principles of mathematics, then where is the grand designer who designed it? Because you're admitting it was designed, you're admitting that there is intelligence behind it. So where is that intelligence? Who is the one who started the process which we call the Big Bang? Who created that ball of mass in the first place that apparently popped out of nowhere and blew up for no apparent reason? Alhamdulillah, from the Islamic perspective, we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just gave the order of kun, and so it was. So alhamdulillah, we have an amazing way to understand the creation of the universe. Now I'll take one more question before we wrap things up. Another common question is that science told us how things work, so we don't need God. It's a very common argument made by some atheists that, now we have science, so science has already told us how things work. So basically we don't need God. We know that, water evaporates and how the body works and the vessels inside and the heart is pumping blood and the brain is doing this and that. So we've explained everything now. So we don't need God to come in and, fill the gaps basically. Now the thing is that, look at this analogy like that of a watch again. So we go back to the watch analogy. Just because I know how the watch works doesn't mean that I've eliminated the watchmaker from the equation. Just because I understand how complicated the watch is and how it's functioning, that does not mean that no one created this watch. As a matter of fact, that would actually entail that this type of intelligent design has to come from somewhere. So just because science has explained how things work, for example, how a car works. If science has explained how a car works, that does not mean that the car was not created. So what oftentimes the claim is that now we can explain the growth of plants and the water cycle and the fact that, evaporation takes place and condensation takes place and there are planets and galaxies and orbiting around one another and going around in circles and things like that. We've explained all that. Just because you've explained it doesn't mean that you've removed the creator from the equation. Imagine looking at an aircraft. Just because you've explained how an aircraft works, how it's able to float in the sky at 900 kilometers an hour, that does not mean that you've eliminated the creator of the aircraft. As a matter of fact, you would have to praise the creator of the aircraft. Whether it's a fighter jet or a cargo plane, whatever it might be, you would have to appreciate the engineering that has gone behind the creation of the aircraft. So just because, now science has talked about certain things and how things work, that does not mean at all that it has basically done away with the creator of all of those things. So my dear brothers and sisters, these are just some basic things. I'll take one more, I think, which is another question that, and from tomorrow, inshallah, we're going to talk about liberalism. So be ready for that. So the last question is, the West is ahead in technology and they've done so without God. So therefore, we don't need God. The West is ahead in technology. They're making nice roads and they have nice buildings and a good lifestyle as well. And so they've done all of this without God. I mean, they've pretty much removed God from everything. And so they're prospering. The thing is, this is also a very illogical argument, because just because you're increasing in one subject or one science, for example, technology or architecture or whatever, that doesn't mean that you are happier than any other people in the world. Happiness is not dependent upon that. Though, yes, comfort does help people out, but that's not the only source of happiness. Look at what happens to family structures. Look at what happens to people's internal peace of heart and mind. And we could argue that there have been people in the past, nations in the past, who have been filthy rich, who have been very, very rich, yet their being rich has got nothing to do with their ethics, morality, happiness, nothing. Because they've been at each other's throats, killing, murder, revenge, all of that stuff has been going on, despite the fact that they had everything. So the thing is that this is a very inappropriate comparison. We as Muslims realize that the life of this world is a test. It is not paradise. The question we talked about yesterday, that the problem of evil, oftentimes the atheist who's asking this question is expecting this world to be paradise. That there has to be no evil in this world. There has to be no evil. If there is no evil in this world, then this would be paradise. If there was no evil in this world, then you would have no free will, because nobody could do evil. Think about that for a second. If there was no evil in this world, that means that you would be compelled to do certain things just like the angels are. The angels are compelled to do only good and nothing else. So that would take away your free will, meaning that nobody could steal or cheat or lie or destroy the planet or anything. No evil could take place at all. So human beings would just be basically robots who would only do good. But that's not what the world is all about. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has not made it paradise. This is a testing ground. And the fact that it's a testing ground, you will have good days and bad days. You will have prosperity and you'll have loss. And Allah will test you in all situations. Allah will test you by giving it to you. Wealth and power and all of these things, Allah will give it to you and see how you react. And Allah will take away from you and see how you react. To see who is righteous, who is a true believer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I guess that's it for today, guys. Inshallah, I'll see you guys tomorrow. Same time, same channel. We'll talk about liberalism, secularism and all of that stuff. We'll talk about its history. It's very, very important stuff coming up ahead. Do stay with us and join us inshallah tomorrow. Until then, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.